This podcast is a uniting heart and soul production and was recorded on land that was stolen nearly 250 years ago. This particular episode was recorded on the land occupied by the Burramadigal people, a clan of the Darug Nation. We pay our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and we acknowledge that sovereignty over these lands was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. At Filthy Hope, we humbly contribute to the ancient and ongoing traditions of storytelling when we share stories on this podcast. Hey guys, before we dive into this week's episode, I do again have to give you a quick heads up. There are a couple of four-letter words here or there in the episode, but we also touch on the subject of conversion therapy and issues of mental illness in this conversation. If these are particularly sensitive subjects for you, please look after yourself if you do decide to listen. There are a number of mental health resources down below in the show notes of this podcast, but always remember that if you or anybody that you know is at immediate risk, you can call LifeLine on 13 11 14 or emergency services. We love you, we appreciate you, and enjoy the episode.
And I remember this moment where everyone's all praying, and I'm praying that this same-sex attraction would leave, and then I would be restored to a healthy heterosexual attraction and be able to get married and have kids and that kind of stuff. And there was a breaking moment at that moment where I looked up and there was this Canadian guy praying for me, and I looked at him and I just looked at him and I went, man, he's so hot.
Welcome back to Filthy Hope, a podcast that spends time in the grey spaces where Jesus, life, and culture intersect. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. My name is Jonty, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Ness.
Hey!
How are you?
I'm great, Jonty. Hello, my friends out there, podcast land.
And joining us, we have a very special guest this week, Rev Ben Gilmour.
Hello.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're super, super appreciative for your time.
Clap track, clap track.
Good to be here.
Ness loves to I love explaining to new guests. Ness just gives me post-production work every week. Give me a clap track now. Put more music in here.
No, I love it.
Dun, dun, dun.
I'm doing production as we go.
That's right. Yeah. If we're really ahead of it, what I'll do is I'll load on the sound effects onto the soundboard and we can do them live, but I just can't be bothered. Also, if I do that, then the danger is that
pressure.
You get your hands on it and then it's all over.
You're stuffed.
Oh, I can hear it. Dun, dun.
Exactly.
Exactly. So, Ben, again, thank you. We're super happy that you're with us. I guess to start, without giving any spoilers away for where this episode is going to be going, you're an ordained minister, you're a proud gay man, and you were an Anglican priest for 10 years, is that right?
Yeah, I was ordained an Anglican priest. I'm a minister of the Word in the Uniting Church. That's all part of my story. And yes, I'm married to a lovely man called Scott Minor. Been together for about 14 years.
Wow, congratulations.
We haven't been married that long because marriage has come a bit later. But
sure,
yeah.
Which I'm sure we'll get into. So how do those elements of your life come together? Tell me how, because for people that may not be from church land, from Jesus land, those are three very distinct things that may not at first glance go together.
Yeah, and I don't think I did a very good job at trying to navigate that for a big part of my life, because they don't. You grow up in the church. I remember being told very clearly that you can't be a Christian and gay, and that's incompatible with the Jesus life. That God's plan for gay people was even worse than that, was that you would die of AIDS as a consequence of that kind of lifestyle and behaviour. And yet for me, when you're starting to go through puberty, all my friends were, in the main becoming attracted to women, and I discovered this attraction for men emerging in myself, and I'm going, oh, what do I do with this? Beginning to explore that, then impressing that to wanting to be faithful, to follow Christ, and then realising that, and we can unpack a little bit more of this, and realising that after a period of time that it's actually harmful to change this.
Yeah.
So how do I live faithfully with this?
Did your family try to pray the gay away, as they say?
Yeah. So I grew up in quite a conservative evangelical family, and that's the faith that was dear to me growing up. Yeah. And I still hold a lot of that. There's not a sense that that's suddenly transformed into some kind of something different, but I have progressed a long way. So there was the gay away. I also did ex-gay therapy for a number of years I really...
Hang on, brother.
Yep, yes.
You what? Did what again?
Ex-gay therapy.
Ex-gay therapy.
Well, so where they try to make you not gay, right? So through prayer and counselling and so on and so forth, there's a number of programs that are in existence.
Like this is a true, real thing?
Yeah, it's less so today.
With therapists, with shrinks?
There actually were some psychologists that were a part of it. And in fact, it was one of the psychologists at a conference that I was at in New Zealand who actually rocked my world, saying there are some people who will never rid themselves of same-sex attraction. And for me, I'm like, Anyway, so that pushed me into pray even more. Well, God's more powerful than you. Who do you think you are? And I remember this moment where everyone's all praying, and I'm praying that this same-sex attraction would leave, and then I would be restored to a healthy heterosexual attraction and be able to get married and have kids and that kind of stuff. And there was a breaking moment at that moment where I looked up, and there was this Canadian guy praying for me, and I looked at him, and I just looked at him, and I went, man, he's so hot.
I love
God,
it.
this is not working. I've been down this track 3 years with you, and you have not changed me. Everything around me is saying you can change me, and you're not changing me. So this is on you now. I've given you everything to change. And so I walked back out of the whole ex-gay stuff and went, I'm going to have to go on a different journey because and I saw, this is some of the dark side of it. People go to the edge of suicide ideation, not wanting to continue life. People leaving faith completely and saying, I can't have anything more to do with Christianity. Yeah. And for me, my faith and how I am as a human are so connected that it's just impossible to divorce it, right?
Yeah.
So how do you faithfully live with all of that? So that's kind of how I began to, change my view. And then I started to talk about what does that mean? And at that point in time, I was in the Anglican church, and they were wrestling with the conversation. Gene Robinson was consecrated to openly gay bishop in America at the time. In fact, later we brought Gene out to kind of help the conversation here in the Australian context.
Is Gene a woman or a man?
A man,
yep.
Yeah, who's married to a man.
Yep.
Now I forgot where I was going with that.
Gene was coming out?
Oh, yeah, Gene was coming out. So, I wanted to kind of help that conversation in the Australian context. So in the Anglican context, there was a bit of openness.
Right.
But that all got shut down pretty quickly because I believe the bishops all got together, and I don't know this officially, I just know it unofficially. And they made a decree that they wouldn't license, ordain or place any openly gay clergy. And so that was the end of my trajectory of ministry within the Anglican Church at that time. And there's a bit of an irony because a lot of people knew that I was with Scott. The registrar of the diocese, good friend, invited Scott and I for birthday parties, and there's a bit of don't ask, don't tell.
Yep, yep.
But that became my trajectory of being able to practice as a minister in the Anglican Church ended there.
How did that leave you feeling?
So I remember the bishop calling me into his office and giving me the news, and that I would that I needed to start to find a new placement. a new position. It wouldn't be in the Australian church. I rang around to see what was possible, and it was clear that was the case.
Like any role,
so as a priest,
as a part of a flock, looking after a congregation.
Yeah, that's right.
But they were happy for you to be in another role within the Anglican Church?
No, it was too contentious, right?
Really?
So, and it was a little difficult to navigate at that point in time. So I did explore Canada and New Zealand. In fact, the bishop in New Zealand was highly encouraging me to take on Queenstown, which means I would have had to learn to snowboard, which would have been a bad issue.
That would have been pretty cool. Yeah.
Canada, but with my relationship with Scott, it felt like, and we kind of discerned together that no, we don't need to become people who have to move to another country.
Yeah.
Like we don't need to do that. Like we're in Australia, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
And
were
so
you married at this point?
No, we were together.
Yes.
So when I say we're together, like legally marriage comes, 2018. So it's
okay,
much,
of course,
much later.
Right.
And the Uniting Church then allows for it, and that's when we got married because that was important for us.
Yep.
But we had a blessing of our
union.
In fact, a little priest friend of mine, Gary Priest, offered a prayer. His name was Priest.
Love it.
Gary Priest offered a little blessing for us, and that kind of, for me, that was a symbolic moment of being together with God and with one another.
Yeah, how beautiful. Gosh, Ben, thanks for sharing that intimate part of your story. It's very powerful. I'm still stuck on the praying the gay thing away and understanding that process and how damaging psychologically that must have been for you and potentially other clergy. I don't know of any other clergy that have experienced that.
Well, not only clergy, so even lay, like just people who want to be faithful followers of Jesus, who want to be accepted by their communities and their Christian communities. And like it's very hard to navigate that space. So there's a lot of people who weren't clergy. Clergy was a real rarity in that space because usually there weren't many churches that were affirming or open for openly gay clergy to be.
Yeah.
There's a lot of don't ask, don't tell, some in different traditions, but openly it was very difficult.
So fascinating, I guess. And for people, me including, it's been a recent thing and probably not over the last couple of years, but I think even just before or at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember there are a handful of documentaries that came out right around the same time about conversion therapy. And so it is something that people are, I guess, somewhat morbidly curious about what actually does that look like? Like, how are they, because, how are people attempting, like in the real mechanical sense, to change someone's brain, but really to get to the heart of who someone is at the core of their identity? So I guess, could you talk more about what the actual day-to-day process of going through that looked like? If you're comfortable, obviously.
Yeah,
so I understand this is obviously a very...
No, more than happy. And the program, I don't really want to give credence to particular programs and people, but I'll talk about my experience in it.
Yes.
And so there was a strong commitment to kind of a peer support group where you would pray for each other, support each other, and it was all framed in this sexual wholeness kind of paradigm, predominantly evangelical charismatic space. I'm not saying that there aren't equivalent versions in other traditions, but and like at some moments in the process, it's clear that the goal is sexual wholeness, so that you can have appropriately God ordained relationships in heterosexual marriage. That's the goal. There was a little bit of and maybe there is a place for singleness, but we don't really know what how do we frame that?
Yeah.
And so then there's a heavy emphasis on the confession of sin, right? And that through confession, then there's transformation. And so it was a bit appalling in a way. These groups, you'd have people come and almost have to try to come up with some kind of confession to make, I looked at porn this week, or I did this, or I did that, And that was kind of the infrastructure around how we grow into wholeness, right? A commitment not to, and holding each other accountable, and so on and so forth.
Like AA?
A little bit like AA, but also a little different. And so for me, it was a bit awkward because I'm like, I'm not really, I'm not coming from a so-called deviant lifestyle. I'm just wanting to get rid of this same-sex attraction and get, opposite sex attraction, so that I can have a fulfilling relationship with somebody I can marry, and then I can be right with God and right with family, friends, and community, because that was the paradigm in my head at that point in time. I found in the program a lot of passive, not a passive aggressive, but kind of full on Christian and full on not. That kind of creates these divides in people. And I was a bit uncomfortable with some of that. But I felt that everyone's heart was in the right place. And this is hard to say, but I actually felt like everyone actually did want what was God's best for everyone.
Yeah.
But the interpretation of that was actually causing more harm, right?
Yeah.
So, and I was in that space. So I had to do a lot of deconstruction of some of that. And so, I don't know, growing up in Christian faith, you want to, there's a lot of language around pleasing God, right? You do. You want to please God. You want to be faithful. You want to do all of that. As I kind of progressed and started to become critical of that, is, well, what is it to please God?
Right.
Is it just social conformity?
Yeah.
Is it just, maintaining particular tribal alliances?
Yeah.
And the prophets are really challenging because in the biblical witness, the prophets aren't about that. And even Moses isn't about that. And even Jesus isn't about that. And so you go, I'm now really seeing something different within the scriptures. And that's really challenging. So if I walk this path, I know that there will be consequences and alienation from my community and the people that I love.
Yeah.
And, and the painful experiences that, at Scott and my wedding, none of my immediate family attended. They felt for one reason or another it was supporting sin if they did. So that was painful, but also there's a part of me that respected that because I was there. You know what I mean? And I have a much better relationship with my family now. As the years have progressed, but it's it's a journey. And I think the thing for me is I haven't colluded with you have to change your mind view still. I just go, it's actually through our witness and our story and our shared experiences with each other and God at work that transformation happens.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of resisted a little bit of the hard edge activist piece, which some of my LGBTIQ
they're great
colleagues go, well, are you really an ally? And I'm going, no, I believe in God that changes hearts and minds, and I believe the authenticity of our witness and our story God uses powerfully. And it's so I believe in the relationship even when the relationship breaks down, or even when the other party says, I don't have anything to do with you, or you've become the other that is not able to be engaged with. Now that's a heartbreaking thing to be in, and it is heartbreaking. Like, it's heart-wrenching when family and kinship kind of just feels, and churches turn on you. It just feels like everything turns on you.
It's horrific.
And I've had friends say, "Why are you still a Christian?" And I said, "Well,
good question.
Because of God."
Yeah.
And to be honest, what other framework will I be found in? Like, I don't want to be just a consumer of products or an economic entity that climbs the ladder to, to what some self-actualization of success.
Yep.
I want to participate fully in the tapestry of all of creation and participate in the wonderful work of God and find myself in that and be lost in that,
Yeah.
And I think there's something beautiful about that vision of human life that it's like orientation. Like, you can't get rid of it out of me, right? No. It's just there. It's a gift. It's a gift, and it's a grace of God that's just there. And so, just like my sexuality and my faith, they're just there.
Yeah. Such a beautiful human.
Oh, thank you.
Just so makes me want to cry. You're just so vulnerable and open and honest, and you're just a fucking breath of fresh air, brother. You really are. to the church and to the world. Honestly, you are. And while you may not want to be a advocate in the LGBTIQ camp and do the rah-rah.
I will be, and I have been for marriage equality, and I will be for certain things. So don't hear that I'm not.
No.
But it's not core to my identity. It's part of how I express living more faithfully.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Definitely.
definitely. Yeah, for sure.
I have a question that, because I can only imagine the conversations that you've had in spaces of ministry, but also in spaces with family, friends, broader, I guess I don't like this word, but secular, whatever that means, conversations with people. I guess, do you have any reflections on how good conversations, like, not framing this well, when you encounter resistance or disagreement, and especially when that becomes religious disagreement, we all know how vicious and sort of judgmental that can get. Yeah. Reflections on how, when you reach that space of disagreement, how to navigate that without necessarily going, well, I have to change your mind because you're wrong on either side, right? Yes. But coming to that space of, that's okay, we can disagree.
It's a really good question, and I think identity politics plays into this a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
And for me, James Allison is a Catholic writer, also gay, wrote a book called The Joy of Being Wrong. And the title actually says a lot, that
I love that.
I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But so could you be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I could be wrong, but so could you be. And we can only all walk in the light that is gifted to us by God. Right? And the other thing that helps me navigate is that I truly want to see God's best for you, which may not be what I think God's best for you is. And I want to learn from that, and I want to grow from that. And so having a perspective that is other honouring, and that's a real discipline, because I think in our culture, in our time, we are so taught that the primary purpose of human existence is to self-actualize and to convince everyone to rally around our ideas and our worldview and our perspective. Yep. And I think a faith perspective says, actually, it's all of us in God. It's all of creation in God. And so there is a disciplinary art of intentional relationality that constantly sees the value in the other, even when you disagree, right? That says, no, there is something beautiful about God in this person or this moment or even this debate, right? And I cannot assume that I am 100% right. I might think that I'm 100% right. I might have a strong conviction that we will have an argument about this, but I'm not going to break the relationship because of that. And I have a really good friend who's far more, political, in a very different political space to me, and I treasure our friendship because we come at the world so differently, but we deeply care about each other. Yeah, and it's that piece that keeps our friendship going. Yeah,
I've got a friend just like that who would totally disagree with this conversation and be horrified that I, as a minister, am actually having this conversation because therefore I'm actually sinning because I'm in the middle of this conversation.
You're endorsing.
Yeah. All of this.
XYZ.
Yeah, definitely. And she would be, actually there's a group of them and they would be beyond horrified and they will probably pray for me tonight, all of us tonight, because I've been a part of something so sinful and that I am just so not on the path to salvation. Yeah. So interesting, isn't it?
Which I guess brings me to another question, which I kind of want to ask semi-flippantly, but I actually think it gets really to the core of where a lot of this like deep, angry, judgment-driven disagreement comes from. Is why do Christians care so much about sex? When compared to all the other, and part of it is this debate about, well, what is or isn't a salvation issue. Yep. But, when you compared to a whole bunch of other things that if you were so inclined, you could open up that big old book that we love, the Bible, and point and say, well, this verse says this, so therefore black and white. Why is sex something that, for whatever reason,
Yeah.
and it varies different denominations, but by and large, the Western Church cares so much about sex? I don't know if either of you have.
And language.
Well, sure, yeah.
As I've kind of researched and explored this, I've discovered that it's maybe not necessarily about the act of sex, but it's about progeny. It's about keeping ethnic and communal and tribal lines alive. It's about who you marry and what kids you have. I think if you look at American history, the interracial marriage was a huge issue. And if I look at the trajectory of that in the States, you see that then that moved into, you know, homosexuality, and now it's trans rights. And and so there's a bigger social trajectory around how do we keep things, you know, the way they were, you know. Now, that's kind of the argument, and I don't think there's an argument. I think it's good to have the argument, well, there's nothing wrong with the things the way they were, but what about where we are now? With regard to homosexuality, it's quite a modern thing. Like we're talking about the 1950s actually terminising it, but we can see that there's been same-sex attraction
forever.
and behaviour forever,
Yes.
right? So
It's in the animal kingdom.
it's in the animal kingdom. You know, you look at King James, you look at, you know,
Yeah.
Lawrence. Well, there's plenty of people historically you can go, hello, right? So it's, and part of the, there's a particular moment around anti-sodomy laws prosecuted in the colonies as an example of primitive behaviour, and that endorsed by the church has been kind of wrong on a whole other level. And there's good kind of literature around, you know, kind of the how this has been framed historically. There's also a deep view of, you know, God has called us to, you know, procreate and fill the earth, and, you know, the Genesis narrative stuff. I think the core thing about the Genesis is that God created and it was good, and that humanity is an expression of the creativity and goodness of God. And if anything, if you really want to get technical and literal about it, the procreation stuff kind of happens after the fall. You know what I mean? It's companionship and intimacy. It's deep relationship that's you know, that's modelled in these early there's these early faith narratives around our origin stories. And but yeah, why is the church so obsessed about it? I do think we can't dismiss it. Is this about just trying to maintain, you know, the privilege of our communities and who can be a part of that? Now, that's not the complete answer. In terms of, is this a salvation issue or not? I mean, clearly I don't believe it's a salvation issue. But there are those who interpret that because this is sin, it is a salvation issue and it's willful sin. I would push back and say, so why has God created this, and why hasn't God created a redemptive pathway, right? If you're going to take just the purely sin view of this, and really Jesus says nothing about this, although people say, you know, therefore a man shall leave his and be wedded to his wife. Well, he's using it as an example of that.
It's also in response to a question about divorce.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Yeah.
And Jesus, you know, I often get the question, the kickback around, you know, Jonathan and David, right? And I think Jonathan David's an interesting one, because I think it's false. I think there's a problem if we say, no, here's an example of a gay relationship in the Bible, because what we understand about gay relationships is culturally hugely different to what's happening there. But I can also say with quite confidence, but I can't say that in the intimacy that David and Jonathan felt, that there was no sensuality about that. Like in the mind of the writers of the Hebrew Scriptures, they don't have all of these frameworks, right? And so intimate relationships between same gender and non, you know, and it's a very different kind of conversation. So that then retreats back. Then how do we faithfully respond with all of who we are as human beings to live this Christ-like life? And that's kind of where I kind of come back. So I'm deeply wedded and committed to the Christian life and discipleship, but I'm also, I bring all of myself humbly into that space. I don't try to be something I'm not, and the harm of that is actually challenge. So I now view that one's sexuality is a gift of God. And ultimately, if it's a gift of God, then how do we steward these gifts well, right? And if that means that some people might adopt and have children in same-sex relationships, that's fine. They might,
what a blessing.
And if they don't, they don't. And also, I don't think we should devalue humans from a faith perspective. They're saying that they're not, because of one's sexuality, making a declaration that they're no longer Christian because they can't be. I really don't see the Bible saying that.
It's pretty rough, isn't it?
Yeah, I see Christian tradition saying that at a certain point in time, and that's the space, many of us find ourselves. Your friends are in, but they're lines in the sand that are drawn by tradition.
Yeah,
I go, but where's the heart of God? What's the call of Christ? What's the movement of the Spirit?
Yeah,
and how do we, as the people of God, navigate faithfully in our time and our place, and not draw those hard lines in the sand, but go, where is the salvos, this healing, the work of God for all creation?
Amen. There's a sermon.
Hey everyone, just interrupting this episode to talk to you about our live events. If you're a fan of this show and you want to come along and hang out with myself and Ness, as well as be in the live audience for a taping of the podcast, then you should definitely look at coming along to one of our live events. These events are totally free, and as well as the podcast, there's going to be live music, food and drinks, and just a really great opportunity to hang out with and share stories with all sorts of different people. If you're interested, there is a link to our Eventbrite profile down below where you can see all of our upcoming events and book your spot to make sure that you don't miss out. We look forward to seeing you there at the next live show. That's all, and now back to the episode.
I love what you said about our sexuality being a God-given gift that requires stewardship, because I think that provides texture to something that I felt for a while. I'm a straight guy, and I bristle when I hear love the sinner, hate the sin. And I think that puts a real underlining under why I think that makes me angry when I hear people say that. Because love the sinner, hate the sin means nothing when what you're hating is at the core of who that person is and is a God-given gift and is a core part of their identity, which I think that is a pretty key difference in understanding between people like you and me and our non-affirming brothers and sisters, where they don't see our sexuality as a God-given gift that needs stewardship, which I struggle to wrap my head around. But that's part of going all the way back to the beginning, is being open to the possibility that we're wrong and that we don't have all the answers. But I think a key part of that is just going, every part of you is a God-given gift that requires stewardship and is not something to, repress or to feel ashamed of.
Yep.
I remember, was it 2017 or 2018 when we had the referendum around same-sex marriage? I remember this vividly. I was playing cricket and our team was batting. So we're sitting around watching two of our teammates out the middle. And I won't say where. People who know me will probably already know. But the team that I was playing in was a kind of a joint between a Uniting Church and an Anglican Church congregational cricket team, right? And so obviously that weekend we're having a conversation. And I'm sitting there listening to 4 or 5 other guys talk about how they can't wrap their head around how a Christian, someone who follows Christ, could in any good conscience vote yes. How on earth, they're probably not even real Christians, right? And I'm sitting there really not wanting to say anything because I don't want to have this conversation. And I eventually I voted yes. I'm preaching on Sunday. And they went, oh my goodness. And so all of a sudden, conversation, real, genuine, quite confronting conversation. And the thing that I found fascinating was in response to my statement of, well, regardless of what I think, I know that I'm called to love people. To me, the fact that I'm even being asked about whether or not someone else should be able to get married is stupid, and I shouldn't even have to be asked in the first place. But because I am, of course, yes, I'm being called to love everyone, so that is part of me being called to love everyone. And the response was, well, that's why we're saying no, is because we love. And I was really curious if either of you, what that sparks in you, like how you immediately respond to that. Because I had no answer. I just it was like I'd hit a brick wall with them. I was like, oh, okay, well, we have nothing else to talk about.
I had to get up on a balcony in those moments, and I've had lots of those conversations, and I'm like, this is what you're taught to say. Like that's in the back of my head.
Yeah.
That I was like, you've been taught that if you affirm this, then you're deconstructing all of this.
Yep.
That's I don't believe that holds water, but I don't have the time to introduce you to another point of view in the moment of this conversation. And so sometimes it's been, how about you come over for dinner with me and Scott? You know? And let's slow this whole conversation down. There was so much political weight in the plebiscite, and as we know, the Anglican Church has funded the No campaign significantly, and so on and so forth.
Yep.
And so for their tribe, this becomes a tribal symbol.
Yep.
Right. and adherence to the tribe means you adhere to that.
Yeah.
That tribal symbol. It's interesting in Uniting Church is that for all our challenges, we also are a little nonconformist in that, but God's going to have God's way regardless.
We're badass.
You know what I mean?
Like a pack of bikers.
We don't need to tribalize around this. In fact, we can have people who agree and disagree.
Yeah, and still be a tribe.
And still go, and we're following Jesus.
Yeah.
You know?
And we actually all love each other.
And we love each other.
In the midst of it.
And we believe that it's actually Jesus' work in and through us.
Yeah, yeah.
As beautiful and broken as we all are, rather than you have to tribally align to be acceptable. And I think there's a critique in me that goes, are you propagating a colonized view that you have to conform to this to be acceptable, or are you allowing the flourishing of God's good creation with all the challenges and diversity of that, but also trusting God in this conversation? Jonty, I love that you said it was about love, and I think that's the powerful thing, because ultimately that's Jesus' high command, isn't it?
Yeah.
Love your neighbour as yourself, and that's how we love God. You know, so. I don't know how else to respond, to say, look, we just agree to disagree, you know, and if you want to have further conversation, let's talk.
My daughter, I remember being at MLC school. It was a school day, and that we'd obviously had the vote on the weekend, and they were announcing it. It must have been a Monday or a Tuesday. I can't remember. But I remember, so the school's got about 1,000 girls in the school, and we're walking, but I think it was 11 o'clock announcement. I don't know how I remember that, but I'm walking between classes to do, I was chaplain at the school there, and all of a sudden the school erupted and the girls were cheering and screaming and clapping and going batshit crazy, and I'm saying, what happened? And they told me, and I went, oh my gosh, that's amazing, that was so great. And there was like a celebration, it was like it was New Year's Eve, it felt like that. Then I get a call from my daughter, who was in year 11 at the time, and she says to me, Mum, did you hear? I said, what, babe? What particular bit did I hear? Mum, is it true that before now, like today, Mum, is it true that gay people weren't allowed to be married? Mum, tell me, is that the truth? And I said, yes, babe, isn't it great? She said, oh, that's fucked. Oh, that is so fucked, Mum. Does that mean that gay people couldn't be married until today? I said, yes, mate. Oh, and then I hear her go, yes, they couldn't be married till today, Sophie. She's just working it out. And she said, oh, that's so stupid.
But that's such an interesting observation in that I'm almost 25.
Right.
People my age, largely, and I do have a number of very close Anglican and otherwise friends who are not in this camp, but largely people my age in Christian circles do not care.
No.
It's not a thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
The kids don't give a shit.
Yeah.
That Aurora just thought it was ridiculous that it was even a thing. Mum, what did they do then? I had to go home and unpack all of that. This is so unfair, Mum. She almost became an activist.
It was really interesting. We, as part of the marriage equality campaign, was part of the launch of Australian Christians for Marriage Equality. And the data was actually quite remarkable. Like, a huge majority of Catholics supported same-sex marriage.
Oh, how interesting.
A large proportion of Anglicans supported it. What was really interesting was the Uniting Church was actually not overall as supportive in terms of its laity as the Catholics and the Anglicans.
Wow.
Which I went, oh, this is really interesting. But the Uniting Church allows a space for us to have these conversations. But in terms of the proportion of people, and I thought, isn't that really interesting? And particularly when at that time both the Anglican and Catholic churches took very strong stands.
Yep.
But the members in their communities actually didn't hold that view and were prepared to actually, in these significant surveys, articulate that. You know,
yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, we could go down lots of rabbit holes there, but I am intrigued about, dare I say, the clerical. What a church says is not necessarily the discernment of the people of God.
And I wonder, Ben, as life goes on and in the next 20 years, like my daughter Aurora's 22 now, and when she has children, I wonder if it's even going to be a conversation like this, or it's going to be something that's not even a thing at all, that no one gives a rat's about anymore. I wonder, or will it always be a topic?
I think, and I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about this, I think it'll be something that we will need to talk about for a long time, purely based on the damage that the church has caused to countless people and countless groups, not just with same-sex marriage, but in a whole bunch of issues around gender identity and sexual orientation.
Not just the church.
Sure, but I think within our Western, I'm not even talking about Woollahra Uniting Heart and Soul, I'm talking the Uniting Church, I'm talking Western Christianity. We have a lot to answer for in these spaces. And so I think it's going to hurt, but it's going to be real necessary for us to continue talking and unpacking about, the part that we as a church have played in keeping systems of oppression and so I don't know. Does this resonate with you?
Look, it does, and I think the church should always have a open posture to recognise that God is at work, calling for a more loving and just world than the determinations of our inner workings. Right? Like, I think that posture we need to have a humble posture, but we also need to not lose a bit of the distinctiveness, but we're called to follow this Jesus way of life, right? And we're all working out this together and in different times and contexts. So there's always going to be differentiation, but also an openness to learn and adapt. I do think that there's been a lot of harm and damage done. Like, in a weird way, people get really frustrated with the Uniting Church Interconcilia trying to come to consensus, every voice heard model, and we just want a leader that tells us what to do, and no, we don't, yes, we do, no, we don't. Like in our little tribe, I think we're trying to keep that broad, discerning view as part of who we are. And I think that's always under threat with the shining light of, if we just had the right leader that would just sort it all out for us. Where our tribe pushes us back into, no, we're all the people of God and we need to work this out together. And it doesn't mean we're always going to agree. So I have hope for our tribe. I really do. And I think our tribe, I have more than hope. I think that our tribe will traverse possibly a little better, long term.
So.
I hope so. We may not. I think Christendom, I think there's real challenges and headwinds, but I do believe that we're also a gift of God, but not in an exclusive sense. You know, we're all families. We're all, you know, but I hope that our learning is by our peer accountability and our peer pressing into each other's lives for the encouragement of the flourishing of God's gifts and who we are in God and with each other, rather than trying to centralise that into an authoritarian system. So I think we're always going to have to, because I think where we see, you know, that saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yep.
I think we work really hard to not do that, but we also want to collude with it. You know, so I think we're always going to have that tension. In terms of the bigger social movements, there's always going to be social tension, and there's always going to be this tribe and this tribe competing ideas around what does it mean for us to be human, what does it mean for us to participate in creation, and the church has a voice in that collectively and individually. I think the danger is when the church thinks it's their voice is to dig in and react, rather than going, what is the Spirit of God calling us to do and be in response to this? And that's hard work. That's hard work. So I have hope. I think that there's room for absolute confession, and we've done wrong. Even the United Church, I think, while we've come so far, we've got a long way to go. You know, that journey will continue, and that'll be a costly journey. The debate at the Assembly over same-sex marriage was immensely costly for many of us. It was heart-wrenching, and you had every view that you hear in the public sphere propagated, and yet the church collectively discerned that we can make space for this. And that was a beautiful moment that as a church we were able to do that and to be a part of that conversation. So I had great pride that at least we're having the conversation, even though we don't all agree, to come to a place where we can still recognise the gift of God in each other, even though we haven't worked all of this out yet.
Yeah, amen.
And I think that humble posture is a real gift, and I think that will help us navigate everything that's yet to be as well. I just hope we don't lose that as a tribe.
I've been like reflecting as you've been talking, and all the way back at the beginning of the year, we had soon to be outgoing moderator Simon Hansford on the show, and he told us a story about talking to farmers. Yep. And you know, a farmer that he talked to saying, well, the thing with you coasties being like Dubbo, is you farm with fences, we farm with watering holes. Yeah. And he was talking about this as a metaphor for how the church can function as a watering hole as opposed to a big fence. And it just struck me that whether this, if we isolate the same-sex marriage debate, is just a fence getting in the way of the watering hole, and those two different models of how we draw people into the life and witness of Christ. It's been a thing that you're either on one side or you're on the other, and you find your tribe, and good luck trying to talk to anyone on the other side of the fence with any real civility, because it's a salvation issue, or it's a morality issue, or it's a you name it. I guess I'd
such a big conversation.
Yeah, I'd love to, before we finish up, take us back to you're about to, or you have just been asked to leave. Is that a great way of putting it? The Anglican Church. Maybe paint us, without going into detail, what that looked like for you and your family, what that looked like for you, what that felt like, and maybe then if you were able to talk to or speak to yourself at that point, given what you now have experienced in the fullness of your life, how you would reflect on that now.
So I remember after that meeting with the bishop, and I was obviously quite disturbed, and I walked out, and I remember some trusted colleagues saying, well, Ben, it's not like you didn't know this day was coming.
Oh wow. God.
And I remember hopping in my car, driving 3 hours back to where I was, and just deeply sobbing. You know, that deep grief that you just can't, like when it's just overpowering, and you just lose. you just lose it, right? You just lose it, because in a weird way, all of your life has been, on this trajectory, right? And everyone appreciates the ministry that you're offering in the context you're in. This is not about that. This is, you've been working with, every step of the way, and then you hit that wall. It's devastating, and it does something to your faith as well, because my faith, all of our faiths are embedded in the communities of the formation that we're a part of, right? That's just normal. And so I still had this deep sense of call, and so I started to look for opportunities to express that. And I was really thankful for, at the time I was involved with this international network called the Gay Christian Network, and it was a solidarity network of folk from all different churches, Orthodox, Catholic, Pentecostal, even Mormons, right? All where faith is so important, and yet their sexuality is part of who they are. And how do we navigate this, right? And that was a real anchoring space for that. In fact, there was a conference, and I kind of, Ness became a bit of a priest in that community in a way. We had annual conferences, communion. We formed this international network, really, and I was part of it, right? I offered some leadership in that space. So that was a place of solidarity and support in the midst of that. It was a bit of a shameful thing for my family. There's no doubt about that. Scott was just wonderful. We'll navigate this. I ended up at Paddington Uniting Church, and that was predominantly through the connections of the Gay Christian Network, because they were looking for somebody at some point, and then they got somebody, and then that didn't work out, and then I said, "Oh, are you still looking?" And they said, "Oh, yeah, actually, maybe," and so on and so forth, and that's how I ended up in Paddington.
And can I just jump in there, Jonty? I remember, and any of my colleagues that are listening, we were here at UTC, and we were going on a road trip. We were new candidates. I think I was probably in my first year of formation, so seminary, and we were off to see and meet the poster child, this new phenomenal ministry agent that was going to be revolutionising this church, this really interesting church at Paddington. And I was so excited. I couldn't believe it, because I had no exposure at that time to anything like the Paddo with the markets and the mission. And as a deacon, I was just like going, oh my gosh, there's a space for me in the world. There's interesting ministry you can do that doesn't require necessarily hanging out in a pulpit. Do you know what I mean? And the daggy costuming that we wear. And so I was so excited, and I met you that day, and I remember being so impressed. I didn't know you had been an Anglican priest. I would have shit myself if I'd known that. But I remember thinking, you are one. I didn't know you were gay either. I just remember thinking, you are one arty, cool minister, and when I grow up, I need to be like that. Honestly, because we were talking about the artworks on the wall, and
such a cool space in there, isn't it?
My gosh, I'd never known a church to be like that. And I'd clearly not been out much. I'd come from Pentyland. And so it was very different to that. And I remember meeting you and going, oh man, you have got the gig of the century. And all of us, I remember my tribe being, my colleagues at that time being blown away by what was going down there at the time. So that you were just new, had no idea.
Yeah.
Reverend Mother, just you were just like the dude.
It was a wonderful time at Paddington.
Yeah, wow.
Wonderful time. Mental health support, refugee support, the markets, working with local Indigenous communities through the restoration of the Aboriginal Children's Services, and it was a really privileged, beautiful time of ministry, and a ministry that was not, you're right, just a traditional gathering for worship, witness, and service. Although that happened, but really infused, the wider community for the common good, the mission of God, and
And a diverse community.
Very diverse community.
Yeah, wow.
Oh yeah, I did a lot of de-churching at Paddington.
Yeah, wow.
So coming from the Anglican church is very, very churched, right? So
It
Paddington
looked de-churched when I got there. Yeah.
and also decolonising, right?
Right.
There was a huge amount of I just got to let God be God. You know what I mean? And also. You're talking about the waterhole and the fences, Jonty. I think I'd been trained also along the lines of about maintaining the fences, and that's important rather than how do we gather around the waterhole, the source of life, and letting that be. And there are times and seasons for things too, right? And there are things that have legacy and continue, and so there was a real grief. To be honest, I think there was a bit of a imperial, the Anglicans are slightly better than the Uniting Church. I had a little bit of it in me. I don't now. I don't. If anything, it might be the other way around.
Did you have the costuming, the fancy black?
Yeah. But because you're part of this, still a part of this colonised church. You've got the now the king is the head of the church, and it's all established, and everyone has their roles and responsibilities, and it's all well thought out, and the Uniting Church looked like a motley crew. It just looked like a little crazy land, even though I'd had, my early years were in the Uniting Church.
Wow.
So I went, well, how do I navigate this? And see, in our Uniting Church, we're very good at criticising and critiquing, right?
Yeah.
I've discovered that.
Yeah.
But in the Anglican Church, it's what position are you in, and that's how we relate to you, and it's all very
hierarchical.
structured.
Yeah.
It is quite hierarchical.
Yeah. I quite like that because based on your outfit, you know what your gig is. Do you know what I mean?
The pointy hat.
Yeah, the hat, the shoes, the how many covered buttons you have on the thing, the bits over the bits. It's like says what you do.
Yeah.
Whereas in our system, I mean, we do have pretend kings that do misogynistic king shit in the church. It's alive and well.
We still have people, right?
I was going to say, that's not just here. That's just everywhere.
That's everywhere. Yeah, but we do that, and we know who those people are.
Yeah.
And they still try to do that fiefdom routine, and good on them. Knock yourselves out. Good luck with that, shitheads. Probably should take that bit out, Jonty. But anyway, we can pray for healing and wholeness for that. But that's another story.
That's a future podcast.
Yeah, it is, and it's coming, brother.
We might get to it.
It's coming, brother. Let me tell you. But we were talking pointy hats. I got lost. I went off in a tangent. Shit.
That's all right. It's a good tangent. I enjoyed the tangent.
Oh.
Did you want to know about the clerical garb that I used to have? Is that where you're...
No. I was just jumping. I was just drawing a comparison and got creative, and then I went off on a misogyny tangent, as I can do. You know me.
Hierarchical misogyny.
Thing.
Well,
that's where we were.
No, that's right. So one of the first things I encountered when I came to the Uniting Church is this program that my department now facilitates, is Living Our Values. And I remember this whole thing, it's not power over, it's power with.
Yes.
Yes. And it was like, the Uniting Church is not power over, it's power with.
Oh, yes.
And I'm going, oh, cool. Yeah. And so, and I already brought that to my ministry practice anyway. But it's not me having a position over. It's me encouraging all the gifts of God to flourish with the gifts that God has given me in community.
Yeah.
As the body of Christ, as the community of Christ. And it's beautiful, but it actually is hard work because it means we all have to exercise leadership.
Yes.
And we're not authorizing somebody to be the leader.
No.
We all have to step up into that, for the benefit of the whole, right? And
it's a blessing, but it's also a responsibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And we're all called to it.
Yeah.
We just got to back off the power over routine. Don't start me. There's a podcast.
Oh yeah, we'll get there. This
Promise.
Spoiler, mate.
And can we have a soundtrack for it and everything? Will you do the images?
Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Mate, it's coming. It's coming.
Spoiler
alert. We'll get there.
Thank you, boss.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here again. I guess to wrap up, what are you grateful for? In all of this, we've gone over even just we've barely scratched the surface. I feel
Yeah.
like with your story, this could be a whole series.
I think
but
this is just part A, brother.
yeah. So we'll line this up again
Yeah.
because I've loved this conversation. In the midst of all of that stuff, what I guess historically and now today, what can you find to be grateful for in the midst of those things?
Yeah. I'm grateful for the remarkable, this is going to sound theological, but what God animates in each of us, I'm always grateful. What the gift of every relationship, every conversation, and sometimes I forget that, but like this conversation, I'm really grateful for. I'm grateful for the opportunity that we can connect, and even more than that, that we are part of this wonderful tapestry of God.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that we all get to play our part in that wonderful story of God.
Yeah.
So it is theological, but it is a deep thankfulness.
But you said it in a really cool way.
Oh, cool.
You didn't sound like a geek with a pointy hat. You sounded like seriously cool, badass. You can stay. You're a friend of the pod, brother.
Oh,
absolutely.
thank
You're in
you.
the club.
Happy to come and contribute and be
wonderful.
part of the club. Yeah.
Just wonderful. Because I would imagine that from the hurt and the surface pain that I feel that I've discerned that you've described, just from even your family pain of abandonment and isolation, that shit can fuck you up in a deeply emotional way. And I would love to know how you navigated your way back to healing and wholeness to be able to sit with us today so calm and so grateful and peaceful and resolute and confident in knowing who God has shaped you and made you to be, Ben, which, might I add, is a blessing to the world and to our church. We're a very smart freaking organisation for picking this sucker. I'm telling you, sucked in Anglicans.
That's the promo for this week. Yeah.
Keep that in. We got him, Jonty.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that's such a huge question that, I mean...
Yeah, next time. We'll have him
next
back.
time.
I think it's worth continue to explore.
Oh, it's a great one.
And there's a lot in it to explore.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a big fan of brokenness and healing and restoration, and I love those stories. They just speak of Jesus and the Holy Spirit in such a phenomenal way, and I think our listeners really love that because it talks of vulnerability and shame, and any time that we can use that language and we can speak truth about our own brokenness and how we've come to healing, I just think it helps others.
Man, that's the definition of filthy hope.
Yeah.
That's what
isn't
this
it?
show is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so let's have him back.
Yeah,
Book
absolutely.
him in. Part
For
B.
sure. So, yeah, listeners, thank you so much for joining us. If you have questions for us or for Ben, actually, Ben, where can people find you online if they were so inclined to ask you?
Yeah, I do have I am on Facebook, so you could message me there. You could probably find me just through liking other things. I'm not that active on Facebook though. You can email me. Is there a link I could probably?
Yeah, we can pop that in the show notes.
It'll be down below.
Yeah. And also, look, I think we've touched on things that may well be traumatic
Yes.
for people here. So, because and while I might appear to be very calm and centered and grounded,
Yeah.
there's a vulnerable edge there, right?
100%.
And I just want to honour that. If this is raising issues for you as a listener, press into seeking some guidance and support. And if that means I don't know who to talk to, reach out to me.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of good counselling services, a lot of good, support within the Christian church more broadly that are there to help you navigate this well so that you can flourish into who God's called you to be.
Yep. You could come to Wellness HQ and get some counselling. It's one of our missions at Uniting Heart and Soul.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm sure I will have said this up top. Future Jonty will have put this in, but if you or anyone else is in danger, seek help immediately. And also, we're not professionals. So if you need professional help, go seek professional help. Both of us, and I'm sure Ben as well, are huge advocates.
Oh, I love my therapy sessions. They're
Absolutely.
the best.
So don't hesitate if you think that's something you need. And if this conversation has been particularly challenging or resonant for you in that way, don't hesitate. So again, feel free to hit us up. Hit up Ben if you have questions. I'm sure Ben will be back very, very soon to pick up this conversation and continue it. But until then, Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a joy and a pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm Jonty.
I'm Ness.
And we've had Ben on the show. Thank you so much. We will see you next week.
This is a prayer for the people who want to give